Our next session. Awesome. Okay, we've got folks logged on and logging in. Um, it's 11:45, so why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Alex Tarantino. I am one of the one of the directors from the Preservation Delaware Board. I'm also a member of the Education Committee. And again, I want to thank you all for attending our virtual sessions this year. Um, cover just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our next speaker and get started. So big thank you to our 2024 conference sponsors. We've got the full list on our website. I also want to invite y'all to use the resources button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. From there, you can find links to various documents and resources, the schedule of events, and also our speaker bios. So attendees are muted. So if you have questions, and we hope you do for our speaker about the presentation, we invite you to use the Q&A function that's also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through those questions. You can also use the chat box to get in touch with us if you're having technical difficulties or have another type of question. And then just a reminder that we are recording our virtual sessions today, so check out our YouTube page in a few weeks. And lastly, if you aren't already a member of PDI, I invite you to consider joining. Our members are a big part of why we're able to keep events like this free, and it's a really great community. So we'll post more info in the chat. So next up, I want to introduce our speaker, Barksdale Maynard. Welcome, Barksdale. Thanks for being here. And so today, the title of his presentation is Photographing Delaware's Disappearing Architecture. So W. Barksdale Maynard is the author of 7 university press books about American history, art, and architecture. His 2021 book, Artists of Wyeth Country, is a rare, unauthorized biography of Andrew Wyeth that is banned at the Brandywine River Museum of Art. Interesting. We might have to ask more about that later. Currently, he is teaching at the University of Delaware, which hosts the W. Barksdale Maynard Photographs of Delaware collection, which is available online. Welcome. Thanks so much again. I will hand it off to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see that,
Yep.
Alex? Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you,
Looks
Alex.
great.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I am going to talk about the subject of architecture in Delaware, but let me just mention my Wyeth book. If you're interested in architecture, there's a lot about architecture in this book because Howard Pyle, N.C. Wyeth, and Andrew Wyeth were all huge enthusiasts about the colonial architecture of the Brandywine Valley. So there's a lot about architecture in there. Well, our topic is the new W. Barksdale Maynard Photographs of Delaware collection that the University of Delaware Library Special Collections has put online. So you can access this online if you just type in the title and also the word JSTOR. You see that in the upper left. JSTOR hosts this collection of architectural photographs. And as it says, it contains color slides and digital images of numerous buildings, sites, signs, structures, locations throughout the state of Delaware. And this is a new resource. We've just put this up in 2023, 2024. And we've got it up now to 1,342 items. So it's not 1,342 buildings, but rather it's that many photographs of various buildings and various places across the state of Delaware. And I hope you will use it, explore it, and especially go search through it and type in different keywords. I think that's half the fun of a site like this. Here I've typed in the word Middletown, and there are 59 results. So not 59 buildings, but 59 photographs of different buildings in Middletown, all of which I've taken myself. I think the searchability is a huge plus. If you've got the book Buildings of Delaware, which I hope you do, you've got to go to the index in the physical book to search for things. But with this online resource, you can type in anything you can think of and you might get a result. So you can type in the word church or theater or parking garage. You can type in the year 1780. You can type in the name of an architect. You can type in brick construction. I mean, you can anything you think of and see if you get a hit. That's half the fun, I think, of exploring and kind of going through this in a meta way. It's quite fun to do that. I've been taking photographs of Delaware architecture for quite a long time now. I came here in 1992 to study at the University of Delaware, and I've always been interested in the materials of architecture. I think that architectural historians don't talk enough about materials. What are buildings tangibly, physically made of? In this case, the blue rock of the old walls at Hagley Museum. So there's quite a lot in this collection about architectural materials. And I've been taking photographs really from the day I arrived in Delaware. I photographed the construction of the Trabant University Center on the UD campus in 1995 by a very important architect, Bob Venturi. And you see the Trabant under construction, and then you see it completed. So these are photographs in the collection, and again, some of these pictures go back 30 years. And I think over time it creates a quite interesting record of how Delaware architecture is changing, evolving, and sadly disappearing. Now, for the book Buildings of Delaware, I took a lot of black and white photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands of black and white photographs. And the book is heavily illustrated, but the photographs are small and they're black and white. So I thought with this online collection, here was a kind of a neat opportunity to revisit some of the Buildings of Delaware buildings, but in this case, color photography. Now, in teaching students, there's a huge need for visual images, and in the 1990s, those visual images were color slides. So in teaching these Princeton students, for example, I'm leading them here on a tour of Hagley. This course was entirely illustrated with color slide photography, which means that I ended up with tens of thousands of color slides. And color slides, if any of you can remember that far back, color slides were a lot of trouble. They were expensive to take. You had to label them, you had to mask them, you had to file them, you had to organize them, you had to refile them after you showed them. I mean, I feel like I'm describing the workings of a Studebaker car or something, but it was a dreadful technology. I call these things cockroaches because they just were overflowing in my little student apartment. And these color slides, that's the same technology that the Victorians used when they were giving lectures to the public. Same technology, it had unchanged. But something strange happened about the year 2000. The slide projector went the way of the dodo bird. So suddenly, there was no way to show these slides. And what am I supposed to do with 10,000 color slides and no way to show them to anybody? Well, there was only one solution that presented itself to me, and that was to burn them all up, or perhaps in some more ecologically sensitive way to dispose of all these slides. And quite seriously, I thought, no one will ever see these. But at that point, serendipitously, the University of Delaware came to me and said, would you like to create a collection? And I said, yes, I would like to give you these slides. And I would like to make a digital resource using these slides. So good old University of Delaware Library, special collections. You all know Morris Library. Kind of a strange view of Morris Library. This shows an addition to the front of the building that was contemplated but never actually built. But I cannot praise enough our University of Delaware library. It has been a home to me for research since 1992, and terrific, I think, of them to recognize the potential value of these old pictures of Delaware buildings, and that they wanted to make these available for researchers, but for everybody. These pictures are there now for everybody to use, download, explore, and learn from. So I thought one of the opportunities here in creating this collection is that I could go back and see the places that I had photographed in the 1990s. And that's what I've been doing over the last several years, is revisiting places. For example, Cass Street in Middletown, there I was as a grad student in 1993. And then here in the collection, I'm back in the same spot, somewhat overgrown now, 30 years later. And it has been extremely interesting to revisit these places and to see what's happened to them. And I wish I could report to you that they are, in general, much improved after 30 years, but sadly, quite the opposite. Many things I'm finding are degraded, spoiled, or demolished. Not everything. There's some good news, but in general, it's been a rather sobering experience to go around and revisit these places. So this collection is Delaware. It's entirely Delaware. We considered making it the Mid-Atlantic. We considered making it architecture more broadly. And we could have, but we chose just Delaware because we thought that that would give a kind of concentration to this collection and give a kind of purpose to this collection, in that if you click through this collection, everything you find is a Delaware example. There are some other online collections that have a lot of Delaware, but they have other states as well, so you never quite know, are you in West Virginia or are you in Smyrna? This collection is only Delaware. And to me, one of the joys of this collection is to see the variety of architectural expression in one small state. It is quite astonishing, the building types and the range of ages in such a small place. Another purpose to the collection to me is that it seemed to me when you go online, it's hard to find good pictures of Delaware architecture. In fact, it's slightly embarrassing when you type in Delaware buildings in Google, what do you get? You get two buildings that aren't even in the state of Delaware. You get Legislative Hall, but it's mostly a picture of the parking lot. And you get the Delaware Trust Building, which I don't think anybody puts at the top of their list of their favorite building in Delaware. So here's a chance to maybe show off the beauty of Delaware architecture. It really is beautiful, sumptuous, intriguing. We have great examples of so many styles of architecture in Delaware. For example, the downtown library, spectacular, Ionic, Roman, with a beautiful frieze derived from a temple in the Roman Forum. Or a photograph I took just a few days ago, Trinity Church in Wilmington. This will be added to the collection in 2025. There's beauty all around. And I would urge anybody who's an artist or a photographer, turn to Delaware architecture as a subject matter. It makes a terrific subject. So I've been from the top of the state to the bottom. This is the northernmost building in the collection. This is Chester Bethel Church, right up on the Pennsylvania line at the circular border. It's a great example of Victorian architecture, one of my favorite themes in the collection, serpentine stone. It's also a reminder that many of our churches are either underutilized or abandoned. It's actually quite distressing to see. So northern Delaware, but also the collection goes down to southern Delaware and the beauty of Sussex County. It's not just architecture. I've also got some landscapes. I've also got some other things mixed in, so that as you explore the collection, you get a sense of the variety within the small state that is Delaware. I've been to the highest point in Delaware, I'm proud of this. I had to don my climbing gear and my oxygen mask, and I toiled to the roof of the world, which is the Ebright Azimuth, highest point in Delaware. And I found there a terrific radio tower that turns out to have a very played an important role in the history of broadcasting in the United States. This is actually kind of an engineering landmark. So this picture will be added to the collection in 2025 with a long caption that describes its engineering significance. So I've been to the highest point in Delaware. What is the lowest point in Delaware? You might ask, did Professor Maynard explore the lowest point in Delaware? I think for some of you, this would be the lowest point in Delaware. The truck entirely devoted to promoting Donald J. Trump in Harrington, Delaware. I want to mention Willard Stewart because Willard Stewart was an inspiration for me in the creation of this collection. Willard Stewart was a Delaware photographer who was hired by the WPA to photograph historic Delaware buildings in the 1930s. And the Willard Stewart collection is another one of these that is hosted by Special Collections at the University of Delaware Library, and it's for all of us. It's for our benefit, and it is such fun to explore. Again, part of the WPA, this extraordinary effort to send writers, historians, architects, photographers out into the countryside to try to create a visual record of what survived from the past in Delaware. The Willard Stewart collection is small, fewer than 300 pictures, but they're so valuable because so many of the places that were photographed in the 1930s have been demolished. And so naturally, I'm thinking of my collection in a similar way, that in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, the collection will be more valuable because so many things probably are going to be gone. My only complaint with the Willard Stewart collection is the terrible captioning. This one, for example, is simply labeled farmhouse. Wouldn't you kind of like to know where it was? But it just says farmhouse. So I've tried to write longer captions. Now, not every picture has a long caption, but if I know something about the building and it's information that was not in Buildings of Delaware, not in the book, I'll add it here. So for example, St. Anne's Church, Middletown, so-called new St. Anne's, 1870s. So you've got the name of the building, and you've got to get the name of the building right, by the way. People often misstate names, slightly misspell them. I've tried to get the name accurate, the date of the photograph, the date of the building. And if you've read Buildings of Delaware, you know I complain that it is so hard to date buildings accurately and people give crazy guesses. So I've tried to give somewhat accurate dates. I tried to give the name of the architect. Then there's quite a bit of information here about the architect that I didn't know at the time of writing the book Buildings of Delaware. And then there's the address. So every one of these 1,300 photographs is tied to an address so that somebody in the future can go back and re-photograph. It's been fun to see the Willard Stewart places that do survive, like Clouds Row. So here it was in the Depression, photographed by Willard Stewart, and then I've gone back and re-photographed as a kind of homage to Willard Stewart, whom I greatly admire. So there are famous buildings here, but in general, if a building is super famous, I maybe didn't even photograph it because I've tried to highlight things that are not quite so well known. And in the case of Old Sweets Church, for example, I've highlighted the materials. There are quite a few close-ups of the materials. Have you ever noticed at Old Swedes that the stones seem to be virtually field stones, just dug up out of the ground and stuck in the wall? They're barely quarried at all. And I think that's suggestive of the exceptionally early date of this building from the 1690s. This is one of our great treasures, Old Swedes. And I've got a lot of modernism. I like modernism. I'm interested in modernism. I acknowledge that people generally don't love it, but we ought to understand it because it's all around us and it's disappearing fast. Many of the modernist buildings I've photographed are sitting empty. That might be the case for the Holmesy Architect headquarters. It doesn't seem to be much in use at the moment. It's an important, extremely clever modernist architectural design, which I hope you will all fall in love with. Now, there are beautiful buildings. There are the Willard Street houses, some of the best residential architecture in Delaware. And there are ugly buildings. There are some really ugly buildings. This one makes my head spin. This is a middle school in Newark, Delaware, that is part of the 1960s movement, indeed crusade, for the windowless school. Yes, that was a trend in the 60s, the windowless school. And very few were built, tragically I would say, for the educational experience of America's youth. Almost none were built, but of course they did build one in Delaware. And it is worth a visit. Now you might be wondering, has this school supplanted Professor Maynard's previous candidate for the ugliest building in Delaware? Because the last time I spoke to you, I said there's one undisputed champion for the ugliest in Delaware. And I have to say, I'm still adhering to my original opinion, that, and you can let me know if you disagree, the ugliest building in Delaware remains the Floyd Hudson Service Center, also in the town of Newark. If you've seen something worse than this, let me know. But it's in the collection. Now, the topic of the conference here is preservation, and preservation is an unmistakable issue as one drives around and looks at these buildings again after 30 years. It's funny how often the well-meaning restorations do more damage than the benign neglect, which often isn't quite as intrusive. But we're seeing, as you all know, rapid change in our towns, in the countryside. We're losing things at a great rate. And so the collection contains photographs of buildings that we've recently lost. It's got a lot of photographs of the Jehu Reed House. As I watched the Jehu Reed House collapse week after week, a bit more, another piece would fall off, I thought, is anybody photographing this? I hope somebody's photographing this. Please, somebody photograph this. And finally I thought, okay, it's got to be me who trespasses into the wreckage and probably gets hit in the head by a falling brick, but it's going to have to be me to do it because we've got to do it. This thing is vanishing. This thing is vanishing rapidly. So at great peril, I got the last ever photograph of the interior of the Jehu Reed House, including that piece of carpet suspended in midair at the upper right. That dissuaded me from attempting to go upstairs. And another grievous loss, the Thomas England House in Smyrna, an outrageous example of human folly for us to have lost this tremendously iconic, Gone with the Wind-like example of antebellum Greek Revival architecture, destroyed. But there are quite a few photos of this in the collection. And I don't think many of you have laid awake weeping for the Rodney dormitories that were demolished. No one has come to me ever and said, gee, I wish they hadn't torn down Rodney. But I liked Rodney. Was I the only one? Rodney was a good example of Lou Kahn style 1960s brutalism in Delaware. It was intelligently done. It was rather cleverly done. And you don't have to love it in order to appreciate it intellectually. But in any case, it's demolished too. I'm glad I took this one in the 1990s. This is that old hotel right near Christiana Mall in that little town of Christiana. And this was one of the most perfect examples I've ever seen of an unaltered, unrestored pent eave from the colonial period. Now, if you know our colonial architecture, you know that pent eaves always rot and they fall off. But here is a pent eave that was miraculously intact. And I'm glad I got a picture, because shortly after the picture was taken, the whole facade of the building fell into the street. I see this everywhere. Middletown, where I was 30 years ago, I loved this house for the fish scale shingles. The fish scale shingles that start at the ground and they go all the way up the walls. The fish scales cover the porch. The fish scales form a frieze underneath the gutter. The fish scales become the roof. It was like a green lizard in Middletown. But I never look at this house today when I drive by, because the whole exterior siding has been replaced. It's often the details that carry the interest in the building, not even the whole building. It's the details. I went back to Welsh Tract Church, where I had photographed in the 1990s. I photographed some of the tombstones. I went back a few weeks ago and I was flabbergasted that this tombstone, legible in 1998, is today completely illegible. That's how quickly we can lose things. Quite startling. I protested in public that they shouldn't paint the IMP skyscraper in downtown Wilmington. They were going to cover it with white paint. And they did. But I did photograph a little piece of it that they had forgotten to paint. So if you see in the picture, you can see the white painted section on the right. You can see the original concrete on the left. You may not love brutalism, but I think you can appreciate there was an aesthetic to the bare concrete, and we lose it if we paint it. This is at Tatnall School in Greenville. I really liked this funny metal mosaic on the outside of the Beakley building at Tatnall from the 1950s, early 60s. It's kind of like a Mondrian painting. They've restored the building. They've painted this white. But the photograph is in the collection. I'm trying to make a record of what we had before we lost it. I photographed the demolition of the flats. I like the touch of the towel still hanging on the bathroom door, even as the building is being pulverized. And then there's a big picture of Wilmington. This was a photograph in the book Buildings of Delaware. Look how dense Wilmington was with Victorian buildings. Look how dense it was. There was no breathing space in Wilmington. There were no parks in Wilmington. Wilmington was chock-a-block with Victorian buildings, and so many of these buildings have been demolished. Prove me wrong here, but I think Wilmington, Delaware has the worst preservation record of any small American city. Find another one. Find another one. Look at the evidence of churches, houses, schools, hotels, theaters, historic buildings that in downtown that are gone now. It's quite extraordinary. And we continue to lose things. As I said, a lot of the modernism I photographed is standing empty. This is a very nice 1960 garage gas station. You could film a movie here, perfectly intact, but abandoned. Similarly, the Diamond State Telephone Building. Is anybody going to want to restore this? Perhaps not. It's not, au courant for right now, but it's got nifty green tile, curtain wall exterior, a building of 1955, empty. We're down at the riverfront, a brutalist office building of the 1970s. Now, probably no one would notice this and think of this as architecturally significant, but we don't have a lot of brutalism in Delaware. We don't have a lot of 1970s architecture in general because it was a sluggish period. This is a kind of nice example, but again, abandoned. Semi-abandoned, I would say, is the Concord Mall, which is a wonderful subject for the photographer. Concord Mall is a time capsule of mall culture, as you probably remember it as a kid in the 70s or 80s. It was the world that was so familiar to us, and this is a surviving example when a lot of malls, of course, no longer exist now. So I took a lot of photographs of Concord Mall, some of them rather elegiac, as it seems to be disappearing. Now you might think this is a funny thing to photograph, but I don't think my children have ever made a phone call with a phone that was attached to something else with a cord. And I'm sure my children have never picked up a smelly phone in public and talked on it after 100 other people had talked on it earlier in the day. This is the sort of detail that summons up a world that's rapidly disappearing. I'm interested in churches, partly because churches, as you know, many of them are threatened. Delaware has a very low rate of church attendance nationally, and those rates of attendance are dropping like a stone. What's going to happen to these churches? And we have such a variety of churches because Delaware really is famous for its diversity of religious expression. So I've tried to photograph a lot of these. Welsh Tract Church, for example, or St. Anthony's, the big cathedral. It's a visual feast for the photographer. Or lesser known churches, like the Catholic Church in Delaware City, where the Virgin is safe from COVID behind her plexiglass shield. Or the beautiful stained glass modernist at Aldersgate on Concord Pike. I photographed a number of African American churches because I think perhaps relatively few photographers are pointing a camera at these. This is a church in Newcastle, and there's been a church on this spot since 1818. Or this church in the piney woods at Ellendale, with the most extraordinary name, the New Shiloh Fire-Baptized Holiness Church of God of the Americas. Isn't that great? And I photographed our terrific camp meetings. We've got two beautiful camp meetings in Delaware. They are such vivid manifestations of religious feeling. They are all American. The sawdust floor in the tabernacles. I could have filled the entire collection with photos of these terrific downstate camp meetings. And Victorian ironwork associated with churches and cemeteries. So much Victorian ironwork was destroyed during the Second World War, melted down, but we have good examples. Here's a rural cemetery north of Smyrna. And I'm interested in religious expression in people's homes, in front yards, on porches. Here's a porch of a house of about 1906 in Wilmington, and there's the Virgin standing by the front door. I'm interested too in the maritime heritage of Delaware, so I've got some photographs, for example, of the wharves on the Christina River at Wilmington. Those wharves just take me back to the Swedes and the Dutch. It just takes you into a distant era. And then the Bayshore, Woodland Beach. I love the Delaware Bay. I think it's one of the largest bodies of water in eastern America that has no bridge across it. And I think that's such a neat thing about the Delaware Bay, that it's kind of still wild in a sense. Or the last pilot skiff in Lewis. So the collection isn't just buildings, it's things, it's places, landscapes, boats, the cruise shells on the Christina. Sometimes I come upon architectural drawings. These will go in the collection as well. A beautiful architectural rendering of the bowling alley at Newport from 1961, and then some new information about the architect who designed the bowling alley and the fact that he was charged in a court case with falsely claiming that he was a trained engineer as well as an architect. Or the arrival of the Freedom train in Delaware in 1975. It's the first ever stop of this bicentennial train. So there's some old photos as well, taken in the past. And there's some whimsical things in the collection. A fire hydrant, complete with a doggy. You might wonder why there would be a fire hydrant. This is a fire hydrant of 1898, still in use in Wilmington. Quite extraordinary. There's the Mac computer at the Mac repair shop in Trolley Square. This is famous in Hunter Biden political lore, this computer repair shop. I even have a doghouse. I wanted to mention just at the end Walker Evans, because Walker Evans really has been an influence on me. He also in the 1930s went around, he was in my home state of Alabama, photographing historic architecture. And I sometimes feel like I'm trying to do in a very modest way what Walker Evans was doing, focusing not only on historic buildings, but on signage. I'm interested in signs as he was. And he found signage everywhere. Here's an example from Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from. He went to Florida in 1974 with the little Polaroid camera. And Walker Evans took pictures of humble, everyday signage in Destin, Florida, or on the Gulf Coast there. And he would photograph the same sign again and again and again, trying to find the most artistic view. And this has really inspired me to take lots of pictures and to try to pick the best and to try to pick the ones that bring out something aesthetic. And so there are lots of signs in the collection. The Ivory soap advertisement in Newcastle, or the wonderful, priceless Pleasant Hill Motel sign in Odessa. If you're tired of watching black and white TV at home, you could check into the Pleasant Hill Motel, because they have got, can you believe this? They have got color TV. Sign tells you. Or the bizarre signage that indicates the hunters' deer stands at White Clay Creek. Or the Welsh Track Church sign, which I love because it's from the bicentennial. This sign was put up in 1975, and it's still there. I love anything related to the bicentennial. I just love it. There's signs everywhere. They're cranky signs, like this one. You know, you don't pay any attention to signs. Until I started this collection, I didn't notice signs any more than you notice a telephone pole. But once you notice signs, they're everywhere. We're completely surrounded by signs. There's some funny ones in here, like this COVID sign. You know, I thought I should put some COVID-related themes, because people are going to wonder what was COVID like. This one at the Brandywine 100 Library warns you, don't get out of your car. Remain in your vehicle at all times. Or even this at Price's Corner, where last year you could still see the X's on the sidewalk. That will give you a chilling memory, I think, from COVID, social distancing. The ultimate experience, I guess, was to see the Del Dot sign shop. This was terrific. This is a Valhalla for anyone who likes signs and signage in Delaware. All right, so that's my little introduction. I hope you'll use the collection. I hope you'll tell friends about the collection. It's there for you. It's there for you to explore through the great generosity of the University of Delaware Library to make this available, make this accessible to the public. I think it's going to be a valuable collection now, but I really think over time it becomes more valuable, because people, I hope, will use this collection to say, what was life like here in 2024? What was standing in 2024? And oh my goodness, look how much has changed in the last 40 years. Look how much has appeared, and yes, look how much has vanished. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is fascinating and super useful, I think, for everybody. I was just thinking something similar yesterday as I was Googling for information about a project, and looking and came upon somebody's Flickr site, which, of course, you know, it's not an official collection, but um, you find a lot of interesting things. And I feel like it's usually it's those couple of examples that you showed that aren't your typical idea of like, oh, this should be documented, but end up being something that somebody is looking for, somebody is interested, it has a story. So that's really
I think
awesome.
that's right, the key, that it has some story, that it tells some story, and it's all Delaware. The
Yeah.
stories are all Delaware. Everything is Delaware. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we do have a couple of questions and we've
Okay.
got a couple minutes left. So let's see. So our first one, thanking you for this collection, calling it a wonderful gift to Delaware, which I agree. Um, and so they say that they're assuming you've taken many photos elsewhere, and asked how you're approaching that work as a legacy.
That's, if anyone has a bright idea of what to do with the other 999,000 slides, please let me know.
All right, so we're taking recommendations and ideas.
Yes, exactly.
Our next question is asking if you've ever explored older historic infrastructure. This person works with water infrastructure in New Jersey, and lists examples of brick sewers or old treatment plants, and they're interested in examples from Delaware.
That would take the collection in a truly weird direction. I think if I explored the sewer system of 19th century Wilmington, but look, I would be up for that. I'm interested in things that nobody has really thought of, things that nobody has really studied, and what we have in Delaware are lots of things that nobody really has studied. It's surprising. Part of why I take so many pictures of modernist buildings is that we often don't know who the architect was. We don't know what the purpose of the building was exactly. We just don't know. It's interesting, and I emphasize this in the book. We know so much about colonial Delaware. We know so much about colonial Delaware, which is probably like 2% of the Delaware story is the
Right.
colonial period. And here we got all these 20th century parking garages and sewer treatment plants and some of them interesting modernism, and we know nothing about them.
That's so true. And I think there's an interesting connection here. So there is, I think, a water treatment plant in Wilmington,
Yep.
on the river. So that's one. I don't know if
Yep, and
you've
that
got
made it into
photos.
the book. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
And
there's one, and
that's a
then
whole that was the subject of my Brandywine book, which was that whole water treatment
oh,
thing,
fantastic. Okay, so there's a
preservation
little
of
bit,
Brandywine in
yeah,
order that we have clean drinking water.
a little bit, Liza, and then I know Liza, who asked this question, and they work in a brutalist office building themselves. So that's a fun
I hope it's
brutalist
not a
and
soul
modernist collection.
destroying experience to work in that brutalist office building that only Professor Maynard likes. You know, when I was speaking up for the IMP building, the building manager took me aside and he said, "Please stop saying nice things about this building. I'd
Yeah,
like
it's
to be able
true.
to tear it down."
Hey, somebody's got to be there. Thank you, Liza. Okay, so let's see. Last question in here, asking if you have pictures of land before, oops, sorry, before it was developed. I think, that's something probably that everybody has noticed about Delaware if you've been here for really any period of time is how quickly the landscape has changed with development.
Yes, and there are, if you go around Wilmington, there are places where I think we have the virgin forest. We have the 18th century forest. I'm sure we do. Some of these trees, white oaks, beech trees, some of those are so immense in the suburbs of Wilmington. I'm sure those were colonial woodlots that take us back to the 17th century. They're not many, but there are, and I've got a couple in the collection.
Oh, that's fantastic. Awesome. All right, great. So I know we're almost at time. Maybe one last question, asking what you teach at the University of Delaware.
At the moment, I'm teaching in the Master of Arts in Liberal Studies program, which is a great program for people who are returning to school to get a master's degree after they've retired often. And I've been teaching 20th century art and architectural history.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much. I did want to also acknowledge, I saw in the chat, one of our attendees mentioned the Jehu Reed House and that they used to drive by every day when it was towards the end of its life, and they're really excited that there's photographs of it. And I actually, that's right down the street from me. I live very
Oh, yeah.
close to the site. So I'm familiar with it too. Um, but yeah, well, thank you, Barksdale, so much. This is an awesome collection, and I think a great sort of glimpse into anything. Yeah, anything that could be significant. Anything's architecture. Everything has a story, and the Delaware focus is great.
Well, thanks, Alex, and thanks to Preservation Delaware for putting on this symposium because this is valuable. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our attendees. Thank you. We're going to take a break for lunch, and I believe our next session we'll start back up again at 1:30. So you can use the same link to join at that time. All right. Barksdale, thank you again. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all in a bit.
Well, bye.